Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she walked down the long concrete pathway toward the shooting range targets. The Nevada sun beat down mercilessly on the outdoor facility, and, even at 7 in the morning, the heat was already becoming uncomfortable. She carried a small toolbox in one hand and a clipboard in the other, checking off each target as she inspected and reset them for the day ahead. This had been her routine for the past 18 months since she started working at Desert Eagle's shooting range, just outside Las Vegas. What began as a temporary job to pay her way through community college had somehow stretched on longer than she ever intended. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady work, and she had grown to appreciate the quiet solitude of the early morning hours before the range opened to the public. Sarah had always been mechanically inclined. Growing up in a small town in Arizona, she spent countless hours in her grandfather's garage learning to fix everything from lawnmowers to vintage motorcycles. Her hands were steady and precise, qualities that served her well in maintaining the electronic target systems and ensuring every mechanism functioned perfectly for the shooters who would arrive later in the day. As she reached the 100-yard line, Sarah noticed that target number 12 was showing signs of wear. The electronic sensor had taken several direct hits over the past week, and, while it was still functional, she knew it would need replacement soon. She made a note on her clipboard and began the process of recalibrating the system, her fingers working quickly and efficiently through the familiar sequence of adjustments. The shooting range was owned by a retired Marine named Frank Rodriguez, who had opened the facility after returning from his third deployment overseas. Frank was a fair boss who treated his small staff with respect, but he ran the range with military precision. Every target had to be perfect, every safety protocol followed to the letter, and every customer treated with professionalism. Sarah had learned to appreciate this attention to detail, and it had made her better at her job. She was replacing a damaged backing plate when she heard the distinctive rumble of motorcycle engines approaching the range. Sarah glanced at her watch and frowned. The range didn't open for another 2 hours, and she wasn't expecting any deliveries. She looked toward the parking area and saw 3 men dismounting from their bikes, all wearing casual clothes but moving with a purposeful, disciplined manner that immediately caught her attention. The tallest of the 3 men walked toward the range office while the other 2 began unloading equipment bags from their motorcycles. Sarah could see Frank emerge from the building, greeting the tall man with what appeared to be a warm handshake and brief conversation. After a few minutes, Frank pointed in her direction and nodded to the men. Sarah continued her work, trying not to stare as the 3 men approached her position. She had learned to be cautious around strangers at the range. While most customers were respectful and safety-conscious, she had encountered her share of individuals who didn't take kindly to taking direction from a young woman, regardless of her knowledge and experience. The tall man who had spoken with Frank reached her first. He was probably in his early 30s, with short-cropped hair and intense blue eyes that seemed to take in everything around him with careful assessment. Despite his casual jeans and t-shirt, he carried himself with an unmistakable military bearing. "Excuse me," he said, his voice polite but direct. "I'm Marcus Thompson. Frank said you're the one who keeps these targets running smoothly." Sarah straightened up, wiping her hands on her work shirt. "That's right. I'm Sarah. Are you here for some early morning shooting?" The range doesn't officially open until 9, but Frank sometimes makes exceptions for law enforcement or military. Marcus smiled, and Sarah noticed that it transformed his entire face, making him appear more approachable. "Something like that. My team and I are passing through town, and Frank's an old friend. He said we could use the range for some training before we have to hit the road again." The other 2 men had joined them by now, both carrying heavy equipment bags. One was shorter and stockier, with dark hair and a quick grin. The other was tall and lean, with sandy brown hair and the kind of deep tan that came from spending time in harsh, sunny climates. "This is Jake Morrison," Marcus said, indicating the shorter man, "and Tom Phillips." The sandy-haired man nodded politely. "We'll try to stay out of your way while you finish up your work." Sarah found herself curious about these men despite her usual preference for keeping interactions with customers brief and professional. There was something about their easy camaraderie and the way they moved that suggested they had worked together for a long time and in challenging circumstances. "What kind of training are you doing?" she asked, then immediately wondered if she was being too nosy. "Long-range precision shooting," Jake answered with enthusiasm. "We've got some new equipment we need to test, and Frank said this range has some of the best-maintained targets in the state." Sarah felt a flush of pride at the compliment. She took her work seriously, and it was nice to hear that her efforts were recognized. Well, you picked a good day for it. The wind conditions are ideal, and I just finished calibrating all the electronic systems. She gestured toward the targets stretching out across the range. The farthest targets are at 800 yards. Most recreational shooters stick to the closer ones, but if you're doing precision work, you'll probably want to use the longer distances. Tom spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a slight southern accent. 800 yards is perfect. We appreciate you having everything ready for us. As the men began setting up their equipment, Sarah returned to her work, but she found herself glancing in their direction more often than usual. She watched as they assembled what appeared to be highly sophisticated rifles with advanced scopes and bipods. Their movements were methodical and professional, checking and rechecking each piece of equipment before proceeding to the next step. Marcus had positioned himself at the 500-yard line and was setting up what Sarah recognized as a high-end precision rifle. Even from a distance, she could tell that the weapon was worth more than she made in 6 months. Jake and Tom had moved to different positions, creating what appeared to be a coordinated training scenario. Sarah had finished her target maintenance and was beginning to pack up her tools when she heard the first shots. The sound was different from the typical gunfire she heard throughout the day. These shots were spaced out, deliberate, each one followed by a pause as the shooter made adjustments and calculations. Unable to resist her curiosity, Sarah walked to the spotting scope station that Frank had installed for customers who wanted to observe their shots. She adjusted the powerful telescope and focused on the 500-yard target where Marcus was shooting. What she saw impressed her. The target showed a tight grouping of shots clustered within inches of the bullseye. As she watched, another shot rang out, and she saw the bullet impact precisely where the previous shots had hit. This level of accuracy required not only expensive equipment but also exceptional skill and training. She shifted the spotting scope to observe Jake at the 300-yard line, then Tom at the 700-yard position. Both men were achieving similar levels of precision, their shots grouped so tightly that they appeared to be hitting nearly the same spot repeatedly. Sarah had grown up around firearms and had spent time at shooting ranges with her grandfather, but she had never witnessed this level of marksmanship outside of competitive shooting events she had seen on television. These men were clearly operating at a professional level that went far beyond recreational shooting or even typical law enforcement training. As she watched, Marcus completed his string of shots and began walking toward the spotting scope station where Sarah was standing. She stepped back, suddenly, self-conscious about her obvious observation of their training session. "Sorry," she said as he approached. "I didn't mean to spy on you. It's just that I've never seen shooting like that before." Marcus seemed amused rather than annoyed by her interest. "No problem at all. Have you done much shooting yourself?" Sarah shook her head. "Not really. My grandfather taught me the basics when I was younger, but I've never been particularly good at it. I'm much better with the mechanical side of things." "The mechanical knowledge is actually more important than most people realize," Marcus said thoughtfully. "Understanding how the equipment works, how environmental factors affect performance, how to maintain consistency, those are the foundations of good marksmanship." He gestured toward his rifle, which was still positioned on its bipod at the shooting line. "Would you like to take a look at the setup?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She was genuinely curious about the equipment, and Marcus seemed genuinely interested in sharing his knowledge. They walked together toward the shooting position, and Sarah could see Jake and Tom continuing their own training exercises in the distance. The rifle was even more impressive up close. Sarah recognized it as a custom-built precision weapon, with a heavy barrel, adjustable stock, and a scope that probably cost more than her car. Marcus began explaining the various components, pointing out features that contributed to the weapon's accuracy and reliability. "The key to consistent long-range shooting," he explained, "is eliminating as many variables as possible. The rifle has to be perfectly zeroed, the ammunition has to be consistent, and the shooter has to understand how environmental conditions will affect the bullet's flight path." Sarah found herself drawn into the technical discussion. Marcus was clearly knowledgeable about his equipment, but he explained things in a way that was accessible without being condescending. As he talked, she began to understand the complexity involved in achieving the level of precision she had observed. "The scope is calibrated for different distances," Marcus continued, adjusting the dial to show her how the reticle changed. "At 500 yards, I have to account for bullet drop, wind drift, even the rotation of the earth on very long shots." "The rotation of the earth?" Sarah asked, genuinely surprised. Marcus grinned. It's called the Coriolis effect. At extreme ranges, the Earth's rotation actually affects the bullet's flight path. It's a small effect, but when you're trying to hit a target at over 1,000 yards, every factor matters. Jake had finished his shooting session and joined them, carrying his own rifle and equipment. Marcus giving you the full technical briefing, he asked with a friendly smile. She's asking good questions, Marcus replied. Sarah maintains all the targets here. She knows more about the range systems than most of the people who shoot here. Sarah felt herself warming to these men despite her usual reserve around customers. They treated her as a professional equal rather than just the range employee, and their expertise was genuinely fascinating. She found herself asking more questions about their equipment and techniques, and they seemed happy to share their knowledge. Tom completed his training session and joined the group, and soon all four of them were engaged in a technical discussion about ballistics, equipment maintenance, and shooting techniques. Sarah discovered that despite her limited shooting experience, her mechanical knowledge and understanding of the range systems gave her valuable insights into the challenges of precision marksmanship. As the conversation continued, Sarah began to piece together clues about these men's background. Their equipment was military grade, their knowledge was encyclopedic, and their casual references to exotic locations suggested extensive overseas experience. While they never explicitly stated their military affiliation, Sarah began to suspect they were special operations personnel of some kind. The morning sun climbed higher, and the temperature on the range continued to rise. Frank emerged from the office building and walked toward their group, carrying a cooler filled with ice and bottled water. Sarah realized that several hours had passed since she had first encountered these men, and she had been so engaged in their conversation that she had lost track of time. "How's the training going?" Frank asked as he distributed the cold drinks. "Outstanding," Marcus replied. "Sarah's been helping us understand some of the finer points of the range setup. Her insights have been valuable." Frank looked pleased but not surprised. Sarah knows more about precision shooting systems than most people give her credit for. She's got good instincts for this kind of work. As they talked, Sarah noticed that other customers were beginning to arrive at the range. The morning training session was coming to an end, and soon the facility would be busy with recreational shooters and concealed carry classes. She realized she needed to return to her regular duties, but she found herself reluctant to end the conversation. Marcus seemed to notice her glance toward the arriving customers. "We should probably wrap up our training and let you get back to your work," he said considerately. "Actually," Jake interjected, "before we pack up, would you be interested in trying some shooting yourself? Marcus is one of the best instructors I've ever worked with, and it might be interesting to see how your mechanical knowledge translates to practical application." Sarah felt a flutter of nervous excitement at the suggestion. Part of her was curious to try shooting with equipment this advanced, but another part worried about embarrassing herself in front of these clearly expert marksmen. "I don't want to waste your time," she said hesitantly. "I really am not much of a shooter." Marcus shook his head dismissively. "It wouldn't be a waste of time at all. Besides, good shooting is more about understanding the fundamentals than natural talent. Your technical background actually gives you an advantage that most people don't have." Tom nodded in agreement. The worst shooters are usually the ones who think they already know everything. Someone who understands that there's a lot to learn tends to pick things up much faster. Frank, who had been listening to the conversation, spoke up in support of the idea. "Go ahead, Sarah. I can handle the customer check-ins for a while. These gentlemen know what they're doing, and it might be good for you to get some shooting experience to go along with all your technical knowledge." Sarah looked around at the three men, all of whom seemed genuinely enthusiastic about the idea of teaching her to shoot. Their encouragement felt sincere rather than patronizing, and she realized that this might be a unique opportunity to learn from truly expert instructors. "All right," she said, surprising herself with her decision. "I'd like to try it." Marcus smiled broadly. "Excellent. Let's start with some basic fundamentals and see how you do." Marcus led Sarah to a shooting position at the 200-yard line, carrying a different rifle than the one he had been using for his training. This weapon was smaller and less intimidating, though Sarah could tell it was still high-quality equipment. "We'll start with something more manageable," he explained as he set up the rifle on a stable rest. This is a .243 Winchester, which has less recoil than what we were using earlier, but it's still accurate enough to teach proper fundamentals. Jake positioned himself with a spotting scope while Tom gathered their equipment from the longer-range positions. Sarah appreciated that they were taking the time to create a proper learning environment rather than simply handing her a weapon and hoping for the best. The most important thing to understand, Marcus began, is that marksmanship is a science. Every shot follows the same physical laws, and if you can control the variables consistently, you'll get consistent results. He showed her how to position herself behind the rifle, adjusting her stance and explaining the importance of creating a stable platform for the weapon. Sarah found that her hands naturally fell into the correct positions, and Marcus noted approvingly that her mechanical background had given her an intuitive understanding of how to handle precision equipment. Breathing is critical, he continued, demonstrating the proper respiratory control. You want to fire during your natural respiratory pause, when your body is most stable. Most people think they need to hold their breath, but that actually creates tension that affects accuracy. Sarah practiced the breathing technique several times without ammunition, getting comfortable with the rhythm and timing. Marcus watched carefully, making minor adjustments to her position and explaining the reasoning behind each modification. Now let's talk about trigger control, Marcus said, moving to what he described as the most important fundamental skill. The trigger should move straight back smoothly, without disturbing the alignment of the rifle. Most shooting problems can be traced back to poor trigger technique. He had Sarah practice dry firing the unloaded weapon, feeling for the trigger's characteristics and learning to apply pressure consistently. Sarah was surprised by how much concentration was required for what seemed like such a simple action. The rifle wants to fire accurately, Marcus explained. Our job as shooters is just to avoid interfering with what it's designed to do. Every unnecessary movement or inconsistency introduces error into the system. After 20 minutes of fundamental instruction, Marcus declared that Sarah was ready to fire her first shots. He loaded 5 rounds into the rifle's magazine and had her settle into position behind the weapon. Remember everything we've discussed, he said calmly. Focus on the fundamentals, and don't worry about where the shots hit. We're just establishing a baseline right now. Sarah aligned the crosshairs on the center of the target, controlled her breathing as she had been taught, and began applying pressure to the trigger. The rifle fired with a sharp crack, and she felt the recoil push firmly but manageably against her shoulder. Good, Marcus said immediately. How did that feel? Sarah was surprised by the question. It felt controlled. Like everything happened the way it was supposed to. Jake, who was watching through the spotting scope, called out the results. Center ring, about 2 inches left of bullseye. Excellent first shot. Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction at the positive feedback. She had expected her first attempt to miss the target entirely, but Marcus's instruction had clearly prepared her well for the experience. The shot placement was very good, Marcus confirmed, but, more importantly, you executed the fundamentals correctly. That's the foundation that everything else builds on. Sarah fired the remaining 4 rounds in the magazine, with Marcus providing quiet coaching and encouragement between each shot. She found herself becoming more comfortable with the process, and her natural mechanical mindset helped her approach each shot methodically. When she finished the string of 5 shots, Jake announced the results with obvious surprise in his voice. All 5 shots are in the center ring, grouped within about 3 inches. That's impressive shooting for someone's first time with a precision rifle. Marcus walked with Sarah to examine the target up close, and she could see the tight cluster of bullet holes arranged in a neat group just slightly left of the bullseye. The accuracy surprised her, but Marcus explained that her consistent approach had produced predictably consistent results. This is exactly what we want to see, he said, pointing to the shot group. All the shots are hitting in the same area relative to your point of aim. That means your fundamentals are solid. Now we just need to adjust the scope so the bullets hit where you're aiming. He made a small adjustment to the rifle's scope, explaining the process as he worked. Sarah watched intently, filing away the information about how environmental factors and equipment variables could affect accuracy. Let's try another 5 shots, Marcus suggested, and see if we can move that group to the center of the target. Sarah's second group of shots clustered tightly around the bullseye, confirming that Marcus's scope adjustment had been correct. She was beginning to understand the systematic approach that these men brought to their shooting, and how their technical knowledge translated into practical results. Tom had finished packing the other equipment and joined them at the 200-yard line. "How's our student doing?" he asked with a friendly smile. "She's a natural," Jake replied enthusiastically. "Look at that group." Tom examined the target and whistled appreciatively. "That's some of the best beginner shooting I've ever seen." "You sure you haven't been practicing in secret?" Sarah laughed, feeling more confident than she had expected. "I think it's just the quality of instruction. Marcus explains everything so clearly that it's easy to understand what I'm supposed to do." "Good instruction helps," Marcus acknowledged, "but you're applying the concepts consistently. That's the hard part that most people struggle with." Frank approached their group, having noticed the activity at the 200-yard line. "How's the shooting lesson going?" he asked. Marcus handed him Sarah's target, and Frank's eyebrows rose in surprise as he examined the tight shot groups. "Sarah, this is excellent work. I had no idea you had this kind of potential." Sarah felt a warm glow of pride at her boss's approval. Frank was not someone who gave praise lightly, and his recognition of her achievement meant a great deal to her. "Marcus is a very good teacher," she said, deflecting some of the credit. "Good teaching requires a good student," Frank replied. "This kind of accuracy doesn't just happen by accident." As they talked, more customers continued arriving at the range, and Sarah realized she would need to return to her regular duties soon. The morning had been far more interesting and rewarding than she had expected, and she found herself wishing it could continue. Marcus seemed to sense her thoughts. "Would you like to try a few shots at a longer distance before we have to call it a day?" Sarah looked at Frank questioningly, and he nodded his approval. "Go ahead. This has been good for you." Marcus led her to the 300-yard line, where he set up the same rifle she had been using. The target seemed much smaller at this distance, and Sarah felt her confidence waver slightly. "Everything is exactly the same," Marcus assured her. "The fundamentals don't change with distance. You just need to trust your training and apply the same techniques." He made another scope adjustment to account for the longer range, explaining the ballistic calculations involved in the modification. Sarah found the technical aspects fascinating, and she began to understand how shooting at extended ranges required a deeper understanding of physics and mathematics. Her first shot at 300 yards hit the target near the edge of the center ring, and Sarah felt disappointed with the result compared to her performance at the shorter distance. "That's actually excellent," Marcus said, noting her expression. "Shooting at longer ranges magnifies every small error, but you're still hitting the target accurately. Most people would be happy with that level of precision at any distance." Jake confirmed the assessment through his spotting scope. The shot was only about 4 inches from the bullseye. At 300 yards, that's well within acceptable accuracy standards. Sarah fired 4 more shots, and, while her group was larger than at the shorter distance, all 5 bullets hit within the center portion of the target. Marcus explained that this was normal and expected, as longer distances naturally increased the challenge level. "The important thing," he emphasized, "is that you're still applying the fundamentals consistently. The shots are grouped together, which means your technique is sound. With practice, you'd be able to tighten up those groups significantly." As Sarah finished her shooting session, she realized that the experience had given her a new appreciation for the skill involved in precision marksmanship. What had initially seemed like a simple matter of pointing a rifle and pulling a trigger had revealed itself to be a complex discipline requiring knowledge, practice, and mental focus. Marcus began packing up the rifle while Jake and Tom gathered the remaining equipment. Sarah watched them work, noting their efficient, methodical approach to everything they did. Their military background was becoming more obvious to her, though they still hadn't explicitly discussed their service or current duties. "Thank you for taking the time to teach me," Sarah said as Marcus completed his equipment check. "I learned more in one morning than I ever expected to." "It was our pleasure," Marcus replied genuinely. "You were an excellent student, and you have real potential for this kind of shooting. Have you ever considered pursuing it more seriously?" Sarah shook her head. "I never really thought about it. I always assumed I wasn't the type of person who would be good at shooting." Tom laughed. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that holds people back. Some of the best shooters I know started out believing they had no natural talent for it." Jake nodded in agreement. "The technical mindset you bring to everything is actually a huge advantage. Most people approach shooting emotionally, but precision marksmanship is really more like engineering." As they prepared to leave the range, Marcus pulled a business card from his wallet and handed it to Sarah. If you ever decide you want to pursue shooting more seriously, give me a call. I know some excellent instructors who could help you develop your skills." Sarah looked at the card, which identified Marcus as a training consultant but provided no details about his military affiliation or current duties. She tucked it into her pocket, unsure whether she would ever use it but grateful for the offer. Frank approached the group as they finished loading their motorcycles. "I hope you'll consider coming back next time you're in the area," he told the three men. "It's always a pleasure to have shooters of your caliber use the range." Marcus shook Frank's hand warmly. "We definitely will. And thanks Sarah for us again. Her knowledge of the range systems made our training much more effective." As the three men rode away on their motorcycles, Sarah found herself standing in the parking lot, watching until they disappeared from view. The morning had been unlike anything she had experienced in her 18 months working at the range, and she felt changed by the encounter in ways she couldn't quite articulate. Frank joined her in the parking lot, carrying the targets from her shooting session. "These are yours to keep," he said, handing them to her. "You should be proud of this kind of accuracy." Sarah looked at the targets, each one showing tight groups of bullet holes clustered near the center. It was tangible proof of what she had accomplished, but, more importantly, it represented a new understanding of her own capabilities. "Frank," she said thoughtfully, "do you think there might be opportunities for me to learn more about precision shooting? Maybe even as part of my job here?" Frank smiled knowingly. "I was wondering when you might ask that question. Actually, I've been thinking about expanding our training programs to include more technical instruction. Someone with your mechanical knowledge and natural shooting ability could be very valuable in that kind of role." Sarah felt a flutter of excitement at the possibility. "Do you really think I could be good at something like that?" "Sarah," Frank said seriously, "I've been around firearms and shooting sports for most of my adult life. What you accomplished this morning with minimal instruction is remarkable. More importantly, you have the right mindset for this kind of work. You pay attention to details, you think systematically, and you're not afraid to learn." As they walked back toward the range office, Sarah found herself thinking about Marcus's business card in her pocket. She wondered what kind of training opportunities might be available, and whether she might have the courage to pursue them. The rest of the morning passed quickly as Sarah returned to her regular duties, but her mind kept returning to the shooting session and the conversations with Marcus, Jake, and Tom. She had discovered something about herself that she hadn't known existed, and the feeling was both exciting and slightly overwhelming. When her shift ended that afternoon, Sarah sat in her car in the parking lot for several minutes, looking at the targets from her shooting session. The evidence of her unexpected skill lay before her, but she realized that the real value of the morning had been the recognition that she was capable of more than she had imagined. She pulled Marcus's business card from her pocket and studied it carefully. The decision of whether to contact him felt significant, though she couldn't quite explain why. Something about the morning's experience had opened a door to possibilities she had never considered, and she found herself curious about where that path might lead. As she drove home that evening, Sarah reflected on how a routine morning of target maintenance had transformed into something much more meaningful. She had always been comfortable working behind the scenes, maintaining equipment and supporting others in their pursuits. But, for the first time, she began to wonder what it might be like to step into a more active role, to develop skills that went beyond technical support. The memory of Marcus's patient instruction, Jake's encouragement, and Tom's expertise stayed with her throughout the evening. These men had seen potential in her that she hadn't recognized in herself, and their confidence in her abilities had opened her mind to new possibilities. Sarah placed the targets and Marcus's business card on her kitchen table, where she would see them every morning as she prepared for work. They served as reminders of an unexpected day when strangers had changed her perspective on her own capabilities and introduced her to a world she had never imagined entering. 3 weeks passed before Sarah found the courage to call the number on Marcus's business card. During those weeks, she replayed the shooting session countless times in her mind, analyzing every detail and wondering if her success had been beginner's luck or something more substantial. Frank had noticed her increased interest in the shooting activities at the range. She found herself paying closer attention to the customers' techniques, observing their equipment choices, and asking more questions about different shooting disciplines. When Frank mentioned that he was considering adding precision rifle training to the range's program offerings, Sarah immediately volunteered to help research the requirements and equipment needs. The conversation with Frank had given her the final push she needed to contact Marcus. If she was going to be involved in developing training programs, she realized she needed to understand the subject from both technical and practical perspectives. Her mechanical knowledge was valuable, but it needed to be combined with actual shooting experience to be truly useful. When she finally made the call, Marcus answered immediately, as if he had been expecting her contact. "Sarah, I'm glad to hear from you," he said warmly. "How has your shooting been going since our session at the range?" Sarah admitted that she hadn't done any shooting since that morning, explaining her hesitation and uncertainty about pursuing the interest further. Marcus listened patiently, then suggested that she might benefit from attending a weekend training course he was conducting in Colorado the following month. "It's designed for people who want to move beyond basic marksmanship into precision long-range shooting," he explained. "The group will be small, and we focus heavily on the technical aspects that I think would appeal to your engineering mindset. The course would require her to take time off work and cover travel expenses, but Frank immediately encouraged her to attend when she discussed it with him. He offered to pay for the course as a professional development opportunity, recognizing the value it would bring to the range's expanding training programs." 2 weeks later, Sarah found herself driving through the Colorado mountains toward a private training facility that Marcus had described as one of the best precision shooting schools in the country. Her car was packed with gear that Marcus had recommended, including her own rifle that Frank had helped her select and purchase. The facility was more impressive than she had expected. Located in a valley surrounded by mountains, it featured shooting positions at distances ranging from 100 to over 1,500 yards. The targets were sophisticated electronic systems that provided instant feedback on shot placement, and the entire operation had the feel of a serious training environment rather than a recreational shooting range. Sarah arrived early and was setting up her equipment when she heard familiar voices approaching. She turned to see Marcus walking toward her, accompanied by Jake and Tom, whom she recognized immediately from their session at Frank's range. "Sarah!" Marcus called out with genuine pleasure. "I'm glad you decided to join us. How was the drive up?" She explained her journey through the mountains, noting the beautiful scenery but also the challenging driving conditions that had required careful attention and planning. Marcus nodded approvingly at her systematic approach to the travel logistics. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that translates well to long-range shooting," he observed. "Both require careful planning, attention to environmental conditions, and systematic execution." Jake and Tom greeted her warmly, expressing their enthusiasm about her decision to pursue formal training. They introduced her to the other participants in the course, a diverse group that included several law enforcement officers, 2 military veterans, and a competitive shooting enthusiast who traveled internationally for matches. Sarah was initially intimidated by the credentials and experience of her fellow students, but Marcus quickly put her at ease by explaining that the course was designed to build skills progressively, regardless of starting experience level. The first day focused heavily on the theoretical foundations of long-range shooting. Marcus led detailed discussions on ballistics, atmospheric conditions, equipment selection, and data management. Sarah found herself in her element during these technical sessions, asking detailed questions and contributing insights based on her mechanical background. During the ballistics session, Marcus demonstrated how environmental factors affected bullet flight paths using computer modeling and real-world examples. Sarah was fascinated by the complexity of the calculations and the precision required to account for variables like altitude, temperature, humidity, and wind speed. At longer ranges, Marcus explained, a small error in any of these calculations can result in a complete miss. Success requires both theoretical understanding and practical experience in applying that knowledge under varying conditions. The afternoon brought their first practical shooting exercises. Marcus had arranged the students in pairs, with more experienced shooters mentoring those who were newer to precision rifle work. Sarah was paired with Detective Maria Santos from the Denver Police Department, who had been shooting competitively for over 10 years. Maria proved to be an excellent mentor, sharing practical tips and techniques that complemented Marcus's more theoretical instruction. She helped Sarah understand how to read wind conditions, adjust for changing light, and maintain consistent performance under the pressure of formal instruction. "The technical knowledge is crucial," Maria explained as they prepared for their first shooting exercise, but ultimately this is a performance skill that requires mental discipline as much as mechanical precision. Sarah's first few shots at 500 yards were inconsistent, as she struggled to apply all the technical concepts simultaneously while managing the unfamiliar pressure of formal evaluation. Marcus observed her performance carefully, then provided specific guidance on prioritizing the fundamentals under stress. Don't try to think about everything at once, he advised. Focus on executing your shooting process consistently, and let your technical knowledge inform that process rather than overwhelming it. The advice proved invaluable. Sarah's subsequent shot showed immediate improvement as she learned to trust her preparation and training rather than second-guessing every decision during the firing sequence. By the end of the first day, Sarah had successfully engaged targets at distances up to 600 yards, with several shots landing within inches of her intended point of impact. The achievement was satisfying, but, more importantly, she was beginning to understand the systematic approach that separated casual shooting from precision marksmanship. That evening, the students gathered for dinner and informal discussion about the day's lessons. Sarah found herself drawn into conversations about equipment modifications, ammunition selection, and training methodologies that went far beyond anything she had previously considered. Tom, who was serving as an assistant instructor for the course, sat beside her during dinner and asked about her background and interests. Sarah explained her work at the shooting range and her growing involvement in Frank's plans for expanded training programs. "Frank's smart to involve you in that development," Tom observed. "The technical skills you bring are actually quite rare in the shooting community. Most people focus on the equipment or the technique, but understanding the underlying systems gives you a significant advantage." Jake joined their conversation and mentioned that he had been following Sarah's progress throughout the day. "Marcus thinks you have exceptional potential for this kind of shooting," he said. "Your systematic approach and attention to detail are exactly what's needed for long-range precision work." Sarah felt a familiar mixture of pride and uncertainty at the praise. While she was gaining confidence in her abilities, the level of expertise demonstrated by her instructors and fellow students still seemed far beyond her current capabilities. The second day of training focused on advanced techniques and longer-range engagements. Marcus introduced concepts like multiple target engagements, shooting from unconventional positions, and maintaining accuracy under time pressure. Sarah struggled initially with these more challenging scenarios. The added complexity seemed to disrupt the systematic approach she had developed during the previous day's training. Her shots became less consistent, and she felt her confidence beginning to waver. Marcus noticed her frustration and called a brief break to work with her individually. "You're trying to force solutions instead of trusting your process," he observed. "When things become more complex, the answer is usually to focus more intensely on the fundamentals, not to abandon them." He had her return to basic shooting exercises, rebuilding her confidence with successful shots at moderate ranges before gradually introducing the more challenging scenarios. The approach worked, and Sarah found herself adapting more successfully to the advanced requirements. During the afternoon session, Marcus announced that students would have the opportunity to attempt shots at the range's longest target, located at 1,200 yards. The distance seemed almost impossible to Sarah, but Marcus explained that it was within the capabilities of their equipment and training, provided they applied their knowledge systematically. Maria volunteered to attempt the first shot, and Sarah watched through a spotting scope as her partner's bullet struck within inches of the intended target. The precision was remarkable, but Maria explained that the success was the result of careful preparation and systematic execution rather than luck or natural talent. When Marcus asked if Sarah wanted to attempt the 1,200-yard shot, she felt a moment of panic. The distance seemed to represent a level of performance that was beyond her current abilities, and she worried about embarrassing herself in front of the other students. "Remember," Marcus said quietly, "this is about applying everything you've learned, not about proving anything to anyone else. The target doesn't care about your experience level. It only responds to correct execution of the fundamentals." Sarah took her position behind the rifle, working through the systematic process she had been taught for calculating environmental conditions and making scope adjustments. The target appeared impossibly small through the scope, but she forced herself to focus on executing her shooting process rather than thinking about the distance involved. The shot felt perfect as it left the rifle. Sarah maintained her position behind the scope, watching for the bullet's impact as Marcus had taught her. After what seemed like an eternity, she saw the telltale puff of dust that indicated a hit near the target. Jake, who was observing through a high-powered spotting scope, announced the results with excitement in his voice. "Hit. Center ring, about 6 inches from the bullseye." The other students erupted in applause, and Sarah felt a surge of accomplishment unlike anything she had previously experienced. The successful shot represented more than just accuracy at long range, it demonstrated that she could apply complex technical knowledge under pressure and achieve results that had seemed impossible just hours earlier. Marcus approached her position with obvious satisfaction. "That was outstanding shooting," he said sincerely. "More importantly, you executed the process exactly as it should be done." The shot was the result of systematic preparation and disciplined execution. As the training course concluded the following day, Marcus pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "I want you to know that your performance this weekend has been exceptional," he said. "You've demonstrated not only natural aptitude but also the mental discipline and systematic approach that's necessary for this kind of work." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "I don't know what your long-term plans are, but I think you should know that there are opportunities in this field that might interest someone with your background and abilities." Sarah asked what kind of opportunities he was referring to, and Marcus explained that government agencies, military units, and specialized training organizations were always looking for people who combine technical knowledge with practical shooting skills. "The combination is rare," he said. "Most technical people don't shoot, and most shooters don't have deep technical knowledge. Someone who can bridge that gap is valuable in ways you might not realize." Sarah left Colorado with her head spinning from new possibilities and challenges. The weekend had confirmed that her initial success at Frank's range hadn't been beginner's luck, but it had also opened her eyes to a world of opportunities she had never imagined. The drive home gave her time to process everything she had learned and experienced. The technical aspects of long-range shooting had proven even more fascinating than she had expected, but it was the sense of systematic achievement that really appealed to her. Unlike many activities that relied heavily on natural talent or athletic ability, precision shooting rewarded careful preparation, technical knowledge, and disciplined execution. When she returned to work the following week, Frank immediately noticed a change in her confidence and enthusiasm. Sarah shared details of her training experience and showed him the certificates and targets from the course. Frank was clearly impressed, but more importantly, he began involving her more directly in the range's plans for expanded training programs. "I think we need to accelerate our timeline for adding precision rifle training," Frank told her. "Your knowledge and experience could help us establish something really special here." Sarah felt a thrill of excitement at the prospect, but she also realized that she had reached a crossroads in her life. The weekend training had shown her that she had capabilities and interests that extended far beyond maintaining shooting range equipment. The question now was whether she had the courage to pursue those opportunities, even if it meant leaving the familiar comfort of her current position. That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with Marcus's business card and the materials from the Colorado training course spread out before her. The path forward was unclear, but, for the first time in her life, she felt that she was moving toward something meaningful rather than simply maintaining the status quo. 6 months after returning from Colorado, Sarah's life had transformed in ways she could never have anticipated. The precision rifle training program at Desert Eagle Shooting Range had become one of the most sought-after courses in the Southwest, drawing students from across the country who wanted to learn from someone who combined exceptional technical knowledge with proven instructional ability. Frank had initially been hesitant to invest in the specialized equipment and facilities required for advanced long-range training, but Sarah's systematic business plan and detailed technical specifications had convinced him of the program's potential. Together, they had developed a curriculum that started with basic marksmanship fundamentals and progressed through advanced precision shooting techniques. The transformation of the range had been dramatic. Sarah had designed and installed electronic target systems at distances ranging from 200 to 800 yards, each one equipped with real-time feedback systems that allowed students to see their progress immediately. The facility now featured weather monitoring stations, ballistic computers, and specialized shooting positions that rivaled anything found at military training centers. More importantly, Sarah had discovered that she possessed a natural gift for instruction. Her ability to explain complex technical concepts in accessible terms, combined with her patient and systematic teaching approach, made her an exceptional instructor. Students consistently praised her ability to help them understand not just what to do, but why specific techniques worked and how to adapt them to different situations. The success had not gone unnoticed beyond the local shooting community. Marcus had maintained regular contact with Sarah throughout her program development, offering advice and encouragement as she built her reputation as an instructor. 3 months earlier, he had approached her with an opportunity that represented the next stage in her unexpected career evolution. The Department of Defense was seeking qualified instructors for a specialized training program that would teach advanced marksmanship skills to military personnel preparing for overseas deployments. The position required security clearance, extensive background investigation, and demonstrated expertise in both technical systems and practical instruction. Sarah had initially dismissed the opportunity as beyond her qualifications, but Marcus had been persuasive in his arguments about her unique combination of skills and experience. After considerable thought and discussion with Frank, who strongly encouraged her to pursue the opportunity, Sarah had submitted her application. The selection process had been rigorous and thorough. Written examinations covered ballistics, physics, and instructional methodology. Practical evaluations tested her shooting abilities under various conditions and her capacity to teach complex skills effectively. Background investigations delved into every aspect of her personal and professional history. Throughout the process, Sarah had been struck by how naturally her skills and interests aligned with the military's training requirements. The systematic approach she brought to every challenge, her attention to detail, and her ability to remain calm under pressure were exactly the qualities needed for the specialized instruction role. The notification of her selection had arrived the previous week, along with orders to report for additional specialized training at a facility in Virginia. The opportunity represented everything she had worked toward since that first morning when Marcus had handed her a rifle and changed her understanding of her own capabilities. Now, as she prepared for her final day at Desert Eagle shooting range, Sarah reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this point. The shy, mechanically inclined young woman who had once been content working behind the scenes had discovered reservoirs of confidence, skill, and ambition she had never suspected existed. Frank had been supportive throughout the transition, recognizing that the opportunity was too significant for Sarah to pass up. He had promoted one of the other range employees to take over the precision rifle program, using the systematic training materials and procedures that Sarah had developed over the past months. "You've built something here that will continue long after you're gone," Frank had told her during their final planning session. "More importantly, you've proven to yourself and everyone else what you're capable of achieving." The morning of her departure, Sarah arrived at the range early for one final equipment check and to complete the transfer of responsibilities to her successor. As she walked the target line she had maintained for nearly 2 years, she marveled at how different the facility looked now compared to her first day of work. The electronic targets she had designed and installed represented not just technical improvements but symbols of her own growth and development. Each system bore evidence of her evolving expertise, from the basic maintenance skills she had brought to the job to the sophisticated engineering knowledge she had acquired through study and experience. Marcus, Jake, and Tom had driven down from Colorado to see her off, a gesture that touched Sarah deeply. The 3 men who had unknowingly launched her career transformation had become mentors and friends whose support had been invaluable throughout her journey. "We wanted to be here for your graduation day," Marcus said as they gathered around the coffee pot in Frank's office. "This represents the completion of one phase of your development and the beginning of something even more significant." Jake nodded enthusiastically. "The military training program is going to be an incredible experience for you. The students you'll be working with are among the most motivated and capable people you'll ever meet." Tom added his own perspective on the opportunity. "The technical challenges will be fascinating too. The equipment and scenarios you'll be dealing with are at the absolute cutting edge of what's possible in precision shooting." As they talked, Sarah realized how much these men had influenced her development, not just as a shooter and instructor, but as someone who had learned to recognize and pursue her own potential. Their initial confidence in her abilities had given her the foundation she needed to take risks and accept challenges that her previous self would have found intimidating. Frank joined them with a folder containing Sarah's final paperwork and references. "I've included letters of recommendation from several students and a detailed summary of your accomplishments here," he explained. "I want your new supervisors to understand exactly what kind of person they're getting." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward Frank, who had provided her with opportunities for growth and development that went far beyond what most employers would have offered. His willingness to invest in her education and support her career advancement had been crucial to her success. "Frank, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done," she said sincerely. "This job was supposed to be temporary, just something to pay bills while I figured out what I wanted to do with my life. Instead, it became the foundation for a career I never could have imagined." Frank smiled knowingly. The job was always just the starting point. The important thing was recognizing your potential and giving you the chance to develop it. The rest was all you. As the morning progressed, several of Sarah's former students arrived at the range to wish her well. The group included police officers, competitive shooters, and military veterans who had all benefited from her instruction. Their success stories and expressions of gratitude provided tangible evidence of the impact she had made as an instructor. Detective Maria Santos, who had become both a close friend and frequent training partner since their meeting in Colorado, presented Sarah with a custom-made rifle case bearing her name and the logo of the precision shooting program she had created. "This is from all of your students," Maria explained. "We wanted you to have something that represents what you've built here and the lives you've influenced through your teaching." Sarah was moved almost to tears by the gesture and the obvious thought that had gone into the gift. The rifle case was beautiful and functional, crafted by a local artisan who had incorporated design elements that reflected both her technical background and her shooting achievements. The afternoon brought a final shooting session with Marcus, Jake, and Tom at the 800-yard line. Sarah wanted to test her skills one more time at the range where her transformation had begun, using the same systematic approach that had carried her through countless training sessions and student evaluations. Her shots grouped tightly around the bullseye, demonstrating the consistency and precision that had become her trademark. More importantly, the shooting process felt natural and comfortable, no longer requiring the intense concentration that had characterized her early efforts. "Perfect execution," Marcus observed as they examined the target. "You've developed into exactly the kind of shooter and instructor that the military program needs." As evening approached and the time came for final farewells, Sarah found herself overwhelmed by the significance of the transition she was making. The past 2 years had been a journey of discovery that had revealed capabilities and interests she had never suspected existed. Frank organized a small farewell gathering at a restaurant near the range, attended by her fellow employees, several regular customers, and the men who had started her on this path. The conversation ranged from technical discussions about shooting equipment to personal stories about the impact of her instruction and mentorship. During the dinner, Marcus stood to offer a toast that captured the sentiment of the entire group. "To Sarah, who has demonstrated that potential is unlimited when it's combined with hard work, systematic thinking, and the courage to accept new challenges." The toast was followed by applause and expressions of support for her future endeavors. Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not just for the career opportunity she had earned, but for the person she had become through the process of pursuing them. Later that evening, as she packed the last of her belongings and prepared for her departure the following morning, Sarah reflected on the remarkable series of events that had brought her to this point. A routine morning of target maintenance had led to an encounter with 3 strangers who had recognized potential in her that she hadn't known existed. The journey from range maintenance worker to military instructor represented more than just career advancement. It reflected a fundamental transformation in her understanding of her own capabilities and the possibilities that existed when she was willing to step outside her comfort zone and accept new challenges. The business card that Marcus had given her 2 years earlier still occupied a place of honor on her desk, now accompanied by military orders, security clearance documentation, and letters of recommendation that reflected her evolved status as a recognized expert in her field. As she prepared for sleep on her final night in Nevada, Sarah thought about the students she would soon be instructing, military personnel who would depend on her knowledge and expertise to prepare them for challenging and dangerous deployments. The responsibility was significant, but she felt confident in her ability to provide them with the technical knowledge and practical skills they would need. The transformation from a shy, mechanically inclined young woman to a confident, accomplished instructor and technical expert had been gradual and systematic, built upon countless hours of practice, study, and teaching. Each achievement had provided the foundation for the next challenge, creating a progression of growth that had led to opportunities she could never have anticipated. Marcus, Jake, and Tom had seen something in her during that first morning at the shooting range that she hadn't recognized in herself. Their confidence in her potential had given her the courage to pursue opportunities that seemed beyond her reach, and their continued mentorship had provided guidance and support throughout her development. The following morning, as Sarah loaded her car for the drive to her new assignment, she took one final look at Desert Eagle shooting range. The facility that had been her workplace for 2 years had become the launching point for a career that perfectly combined her technical interests, natural abilities, and desire to make a meaningful contribution. Frank, Marcus, Jake, and Tom were all present for her departure, providing encouragement and expressing confidence in her future success. Their support meant everything to her, representing the relationships and experiences that had made her transformation possible. As she drove away from the range and toward her new life, Sarah carried with her not just the technical knowledge and practical skills she had developed, but a fundamental understanding of her own potential and the possibilities that existed when she was willing to embrace new challenges. The woman who had once been content working behind the scenes, maintaining equipment and supporting others in their pursuits, had discovered that she was capable of much more. The journey that began with three strangers recognizing her potential had evolved into a career that would allow her to impact the lives of military personnel and contribute to their success in challenging environments. Sarah's story had become one of transformation, growth, and the power of recognizing potential even in the most unexpected circumstances. What had started as a chance encounter had evolved into a life-changing journey that demonstrated the remarkable possibilities that existed when natural ability was combined with systematic effort and the courage to accept new challenges. The road ahead was filled with uncertainty and new challenges, but Sarah faced them with confidence born of experience and growth. She had learned to trust her abilities, embrace complexity, and pursue excellence through systematic effort and continuous learning. Most importantly, she had discovered that her potential was far greater than she had ever imagined, and that recognition had opened doors to a future filled with meaningful opportunities and the chance to make a significant impact in her chosen field.